A good fundraiser would have ignored his orders? Background: a couple years back I was working as a fundraiser on a political campaign. At the time, it was just me and the campaign manager, we will call him Brian. I had been hired as deputy director for their finance team, the number 2. It took months before Brian was able to hire a main fundraiser for the team. During that time, I had been running the entire fundraising program by myself. While there were bumps along the road, we were quite successful in exceeding our goals. Despite this, Brian would constantly remind me of my inexperience. He claimed I couldn't have good instincts because I didn't have enough years in the game. QR story. Political fundraising is a high-stress job, especially at the end of the quarter, EOQ, before you have to report how much your campaign has raised. The day before the EOQ is a crunch to raise as much money as possible. I had suggested that I would use that time to call previous donors to ask if they would consider matching their donation from the last election cycle. Brian responded to my suggestion with a sarcastic, "Obviously that is what we are going to do." Whatever Brian. He prints a list of previous donors with donation amounts. He told me to start from the beginning and work my way through the list. But here is the thing, Brian printed the list in alphabetical order. I told him I was going to reprint the list in order of highest to lowest dollar amount. This way we could maximize getting more money in a short amount of time. There were many names on the list that had donated between $250 to $500, but for whatever reason the first 50+ people had donated more like $1 to $50. Brian hated when I made suggestions after he had done all the work to set something up. I explained it would only take me a few minutes to reorganize the list on Excel and or I'd be happy to call out of order to larger donors first. Brian explained he was the boss, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was to call the list the way he suggested. I clarified that he wanted me to call these people in alphabetical order. Yes? Alrighty then. I started making calls. I call well over 100 people that day, mostly voicemails, and out of the people who did donate, no one's donation had exceeded over $100. At the end of the day, Brian checked in and saw I raised a whopping $340. We could have easily raised $3,000 to $5,000 had we prioritized differently. He was pissed. When he asked why I hadn't called this or that $500 donor, I explained that I was following his specific orders. He yelled at me claiming that a good fundraiser would have ignored his orders and done what was best for the team. After a week of blaming me for sabotaging the campaign on purpose, remember, we had already exceeded our goal, I quit and got a better job. When they eventually hired a finance director, she quit a month into the job. The campaign died out shortly after, no doubt because of Brian's horrible leadership.
Now to the comments. A good campaign manager will let others do their jobs without micromanaging unless it's needed.
OP replied, "Micromanaging is the death of campaigns. Hire staff you trust and work as a team."
Micromanaging is the death of a lot of things. Special projects, small businesses, fundraising for schools or youth groups and many more. No, not leadership. Management. There's a huge difference between leaders and managers. Never manage people who don't need to be managed.
I got a job once managing apartments, after taking a psych evaluation that said I wouldn't take orders well. I had worked for the district manager before and she wanted to hire me. The owner said no because he won't take orders. My old manager told the owner, the beauty of it was, you won't need to give him any. They hired me and I was manager of the year that year.
Why would you take a psych evaluation for any job? Your medical condition is duck all to do with an employer beyond things like, are you capable of walking if you're going to be employed to walk from door to door selling/delivering stuff? Update for using Q properly instead of K or Q or worse.
I never seen K or Q used for Q.
Happens all the time. I would have let the candidate know what was going on.
OP replied. When I left, I shared a lot of bad decisions/verbal abuse with the candidate. Unfortunately, he was being manipulated and lied to by Brian, who had convinced him this is the way campaigns are run, and people like me didn't have the heart or instinct for success.
If the politician couldn't sort out who to believe, you or Brian, perhaps it's just as well the campaign died out. Where was the candidate in this? Surely he could have replaced Brian? It seems like hiring Brian as the campaign manager was a big boo-boo.
OP replied. Total boo-boo. Candidate had a full-time job, so lots of the work is done behind the scenes. Pretty typical for campaigns. Brian was a different person when candidate was not around. Sucked for everyone.
Hopefully Brian ended up working at the Golden Arches.
What a crappy thing to wish on the Golden Arches.
So. For the king? There is a story about Admiral Nelson berating some of his captains for breaking off a chase of French ships. In their defense, they stated that they had followed the standing orders issued by Nelson himself. "You were following order," exclaimed Nelson. "Any fool can follow orders. This is why the British Navy was so successful."
The Seabees?